using the checklist as a documentation tool. So I want to touch on a couple of subtopics as we do it. The first is that it is a place where you can document skip measure compliance. Now, one of the things that I think is important, though, is consistency. So that all of your documentation needs to look the same. If you document your skip measures in multiple places, you need to make sure that the skip measure documentation that you accompany with the checklist either refers to another skip measure documentation somewhere else so that it's absolutely consistent, or in some way is consistent. So consistency is important there. But there's no question that you can use the checklist to make sure that you do the skip measures and also to document. The electronic medical record can be helpful in documenting the checklist, obviously. But one of the temptations there is that the nurse sits at a computer checking boxes and nobody actually does the checklist. We know that that happens and we discourage it. So if you use the EMR as a documentation tool, which I know many of you will consider at least, please do the checklist as a separate activity, prompted by something else in most cases, not the computer monitor that's sitting in front of the nurse. Now, I know technology is extremely variable in hospitals across the United States right now. If it was possible to display a readable checklist on a monitor for the surgical team, that is a perfectly acceptable way of doing this work. And some hospitals have been very inventive and have done that. But what I beg that you not do is put the checklist in front of a nurse in a corner where nobody can see it except for the nurse. It is much more likely to get turned into a rote, just check the box exercise, and you'll lose all the value around communication and teamwork. Whether to put it in the patient's chart or not is an individual hospital decision. And there are pros and cons to that. I'm going to guess that probably half the hospitals where it is used, the documentation in the patient's chart is checklist completed without documenting the individual elements. But the entire spectrum exists out there, from documenting every single checklist element to just documenting that the checklist itself was done. Many of you already have documentation around the universal protocol, and you can add a box to that, or you can build off of that. But again, there is no right answer, a very hospital-specific issue. Signatures. The issue of whether somebody should sign a piece of paper or not, again, is very hospital-specific. We saw that cause a major problem in implementation of a checklist in hospitals in Great Britain. It caused a near mutiny because the first versions of their checklist required only the signature of nurses, which made it seem like the checklist, the only person burdened by it was the nursing staff. That probably is not the right way to go. Many hospitals we're aware of require accountability from all team members around performing the checklist. So that includes the surgeons, the nurses, and the anesthesiologists. If you're going to use signatures, I would encourage you to use that as another way to drive home the idea that the responsibility is shared. And then finally, issues around malpractice, which when people express concerns about the checklist, often comes up, and I'm going to save that for a couple minutes from now and do it right before the end.